The sharp crunch of twisting metal shattered the peaceful morning at the coastal marina as a gleaming luxury SUV accidentally rolled backward into a faded, rusty camper that looked as though it had survived a lifetime of forgotten roads. People nearby barely glanced at the collision, assuming the owner of the battered camper would simply accept an insurance payment and move on. But when the camper door flew open, an old cedar chest tumbled onto the pavement. Its lid burst apart, scattering military medals, yellowed photographs, and a weathered leather journal wrapped inside a carefully folded American flag. The elegant young billionaire behind the SUV froze the instant she noticed the golden family crest pressed into the diary's worn cover. It was identical to the crest engraved on her late father's military sword. For 26 years, her family had searched for that diary, believing it had vanished forever on a distant battlefield. She had no idea that the quiet single father who owned the rusty camper had protected it for nearly 2 decades, waiting for the right family to finally bring it home. Before this unforgettable story begins, if you believe kindness, honesty, and second chances can change lives, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes people should never be judged by appearances, and subscribe to Kindness Paradise. Your support helps us continue creating emotional stories that inspire hope and remind the world that life's greatest blessings often arrive through unexpected moments. Callum Mercer had spent the last 8 years raising his 10-year-old daughter, Isla, after losing his wife to a sudden illness. Their aging camper was far more than an old vehicle. It was the only home they could comfortably afford while traveling from town to town, restoring antique furniture, repairing historic church organs, and preserving family heirlooms for small communities across the country. Though strangers often looked at the rust covering its sides and assumed failure had followed Callum through life, he never felt embarrassed by it. Every dent carried memories of family adventures, every worn cabinet reminded him of evenings spent reading stories to Isla, and every mile represented another promise kept to the woman he had loved. Hidden inside a handmade cedar chest rested the one possession Callum guarded more carefully than anything else. Nearly 19 years earlier, while volunteering after a devastating flood, he had helped rescue an elderly veteran named Colonel Arthur Delaney. During the final days of his life, the grateful soldier entrusted Callum with a leather diary belonging to his closest wartime friend, Colonel Malcolm Hawthorne. Arthur explained that Malcolm had written inside the journal almost every evening during the war, filling its pages with letters intended for the little daughter he hoped would one day understand why he had chosen to serve his country. Before Arthur passed away, he made Callum promise to return the diary to Malcolm's family if they could ever be found. Callum accepted that promise without hesitation. Over the following years he searched through veterans organizations, military archives, historical societies, and countless public records. Time after time, every lead reached another dead end. Collectors repeatedly offered astonishing sums of money for the rare journal, but Callum refused every offer without hesitation. To him, the diary never belonged in a private collection or behind auction glass. It belonged with the family whose history had been waiting decades to come home. That same beautiful spring morning, billionaire heiress Adriana Hawthorne arrived at the marina after speaking at a veterans charity breakfast supporting military families. As the only surviving child of Colonel Malcolm Hawthorne, she had inherited one of the nation's largest shipping companies along with an enormous responsibility to preserve her father's remarkable legacy. Although museums proudly displayed his medals and official service records, one priceless piece of family history had always remained missing. His personal wartime diary disappeared shortly after his final mission, leaving behind unanswered questions that haunted her mother until the day she passed away. Distracted by an urgent call from company directors discussing an international merger, Adriana slowly reversed into the parking space without noticing Callum's camper behind her. The gentle collision caused little visible damage, but it was enough to send the cedar chest sliding onto the pavement. Horrified by the accident, Adriana rushed forward to help gather the scattered belongings. As she carefully lifted the leather diary from the ground, her hands suddenly stopped trembling. The faded gold crest embossed on its cover matched the Hawthorne family emblem she had seen every day throughout her childhood. Callum quietly explained how the diary had come into his care nearly 2 decades earlier and how he had spent years searching for Colonel Malcolm Hawthorne's descendants. Adriana listened without interrupting while tears slowly filled her eyes beneath the bright morning sunlight. The diary she had believed lost forever now rested only inches away, protected all those years by a humble father living inside an old camper. Neither of them yet realized that tucked inside the final pages rested one sealed envelope addressed only to, "My beloved daughter." It had remained unopened for more than 25 years, patiently waiting for destiny to complete a promise that had survived an entire generation. The bright afternoon sunlight shimmered across the marina as Adriana Hawthorne carefully held the weathered diary against her heart. For several long moments, she could not bring herself to open it. Every scratch on the leather cover reminded her that this journal had survived a war, decades of uncertainty, and countless opportunities to disappear forever. Looking at Callum Mercer, she struggled to understand how a man with so little had protected something worth millions in historical value without ever trying to profit from it. She realized that true wealth had nothing to do with money. It lived inside the quiet integrity of the man standing before her. Together they carried the cedar chest to a nearby bench overlooking the peaceful harbor. With trembling hands, Adriana slowly turned the pages. They were filled not only with battlefield memories but with deeply personal thoughts her father had written almost every night. He described missing bedtime stories, worrying about his little girl growing up without him, and praying that one day she would understand that every sacrifice he made came from love rather than duty alone. The words transformed the legendary war hero into simply a father longing to return home to his daughter. Near the final pages, Adriana discovered the sealed envelope marked, "For my daughter, if this diary ever finds you." Fighting back tears, she carefully opened it. Inside was a heartfelt letter written only days before her father's final mission. He told her that life would measure her by many things, wealth, achievements, and success, but he hoped she would always remember that character mattered more than fortune. He asked her never to judge anyone by their appearance because the greatest people often carried their strength quietly. He also wrote that if someone ever returned the diary, that person should forever be considered family because they had honored a promise too valuable to measure with money. When Adriana finished reading, silence filled the harbor. She looked at Callum with overwhelming gratitude. For nearly 20 years he had faithfully protected not merely a historical document but the final conversation between a father and his daughter. Despite raising Isla alone and facing financial hardships, he had never broken his promise. At that moment Adriana understood that her father's final lesson had arrived through the very man entrusted to protect his words. Determined to honor both men, Adriana invited Callum and Isla to the Hawthorne estate. There, historians carefully preserved the original diary while creating a digital archive so future generations could learn from Colonel Hawthorne's remarkable story. Adriana also established the Malcolm Hawthorne Promise Foundation, dedicated to supporting widowed parents, military families, and children growing up with a single parent. She insisted that Callum become one of the foundation's trustees because, in her father's own words, no one represented honor better than the man who had faithfully kept his promise. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes honesty is more valuable than riches, leave a heartfelt comment, and subscribe to Kindness Paradise for more emotional stories celebrating family, hope, and second chances. Special request. Please comment, promises kept become priceless legacies. As the golden afternoon sun reflected across the calm water, Adriana carefully placed her father's diary inside a protective case before embracing Callum and Isla with tears of gratitude. She finally understood that the greatest inheritance her father had left behind was not his fortune, his medals, or his company. It was the lesson that integrity, faithfully lived, can protect hope across generations until the day it finally finds its way home. 1 year later, Colonel Malcolm Hawthorne's wartime diary had become the centerpiece of a national military history exhibition, where thousands of visitors came not only to read the moving words of a decorated soldier but also to learn the remarkable story of the humble single father who had protected those pages for nearly 2 decades. Beside the display stood a simple plaque explaining that history survives because ordinary people choose honor over personal gain. Every visitor paused to read Callum Mercer's story, proving that true heroes are often found far from battlefields. The Malcolm Hawthorne Promise Foundation quickly grew into one of the country's most respected charitable organizations. Military widows received emergency assistance, children of fallen service members earned educational scholarships, and single parents found housing, employment, and counseling during life's most difficult moments. Adriana Hawthorne insisted that every new program reflect the values her father had written about in his diary: kindness, humility, courage, and unwavering integrity. She often reminded her staff that the foundation existed because one stranger had quietly kept a promise for 20 years without expecting anything in return. Callum Mercer continued living the simple life he loved. Although Adriana offered him generous financial rewards, he accepted only enough to repair the old camper and provide a secure future for Isla. He refused luxury homes or expensive gifts because he believed happiness had never depended on possessions. Together, he and Isla continued traveling across small towns, restoring antique furniture and preserving forgotten family heirlooms. Everywhere they went, people recognized them not for wealth but for the remarkable story of honesty that had inspired an entire nation. As Isla grew older, she proudly told friends that her father had taught her the greatest lesson anyone could learn. Promises matter most when nobody is watching. Watching Callum live by that principle every day shaped her own character. She volunteered at veterans' hospitals, helped preserve historical artifacts, and dreamed of becoming a museum conservator so future generations would never lose the stories that connect families across time. Adriana often smiled, knowing that her father's legacy was no longer confined to faded pages but was now alive in the hearts of young people like Isla. On the anniversary of the marina accident, the city dedicated a beautiful waterfront memorial honoring veterans and the people who protect their stories. At its center stood a bronze sculpture of an old camper beside an open diary, symbolizing how an unexpected collision had reunited a daughter with the final words of her father. Carved beneath the sculpture were Colonel Hawthorne's last written words: "The greatest inheritance is not wealth, but the promises we faithfully keep." The crowd stood in respectful silence as veterans saluted, families embraced, and children placed flowers around the memorial. Adriana looked toward Callum and realized that although they came from completely different worlds, destiny had united them through honor rather than fortune. Her father's greatest wish had finally come true. The diary had returned home, and the man who protected it had become part of the family he had spent years searching for. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes honesty and kindness never go unnoticed, leave a heartfelt comment, and subscribe to Kindness Paradise for more emotional stories about hope, family, and second chances. Special request. Please comment, integrity is a treasure no amount of money can buy. As the warm evening sun slowly disappeared beyond the peaceful harbor, Callum and Isla climbed into their beloved old camper, while Adriana gently held her father's diary close to her heart. What began as an accidental collision became a journey of healing, gratitude, and lasting friendship. In the end, everyone discovered that the most valuable things in life are not hidden in bank accounts or luxury estates, they are found in promises kept, kindness shared, and love that survives across generations.